Since the inauguration, Donald Trump has flipped on a couple of his most publicized, clearest economic positions, things that he was likely to do were he to become president. For instance, he repeatedly said that he would label China a currency manipulator once he becomes president. In the past week, he's announced that he's not going to do that, saying the reason is that he needs China's help to deal with North Korea. Okay, perhaps. Also, he repeatedly said that he was likely to remove effectively the tax break for so-called carried interest for a certain class of people working in Wall Street. And he hasn't said that he's not going to do that, but he's taken effectively no action. And we're nearing the 100-day point in his presidency so far. So why is it that on these issues he seems to be diverging so far from campaign Donald Trump? Well, it might be that he's surrounded himself with the sorts of billionaires that'll push you in the direction of maintaining policies that they currently benefit from. One of those billionaires is Steve Schwarzman, head of the Blackstone private equity group. Now I know, David, you have an article coming out specifically about some of the positions he's staked out on those particular issues too, and his business connections with China, the number of different industries he has there. So what do you think about him potentially serving as more and more of an unofficial advisor to Donald Trump on these sorts of policies? Is it likely that Donald Trump will exercise any autonomy when it comes to these issues? Where else might his influence be seen?
Well, first of all, it's not unofficial, it's official. Steve Schwarzman is—
Well, he's not an actual government employee.
That's right.
Which is consequential when it comes to ethics rules.
Yes, so basically Steve Schwarzman was appointed to run the White House, a White House council, an official White House council that advises Trump on economic policies. Trump says he speaks frequently with Steve Schwarzman, who is the billionaire CEO of Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm. By being a chairman of a White House panel, but also saying I'm not a full-time White House employee, the Trump administration is interpreting this to mean that Steve Schwarzman, the CEO of Blackstone, is not subject to conflict of interest laws, is not subject to rules that would force him to divest from his company. And so he is effectively advising Trump and sculpting White House policy on various policies that Blackstone is currently investing in. You mentioned a couple. I mean, you mentioned the currency manipulation. Blackstone in its own SEC filings says that it has an interest in those policies. Carried interest, I mean, carried interest is a tax benefit for private equity executives like Steve Schwarzman. Blackstone is also—
to the tune of millions of dollars per year, theoretically.
There was a report that said that Steve Schwarzman, if they closed that loophole and forced him to pay the income tax rates that regular people pay, you have to pay about $8 million more a year in income taxes, which for him is not that much. But it gets even more intense, which is that Trump moved, for instance, to repeal the so-called fiduciary rule, the rule that would say that financial advisors have to keep their clients' best interests, prioritize their clients' best interests. Blackstone has a vested interest in that rule not going forward, because that rule makes it much harder for Blackstone to access the multi-trillion-dollar world of 401ks and IRAs. Schwarzman has said it is our dream to get into that multi-trillion-dollar retail business, and our article, which is now up at ibtimes.com, details how the fiduciary rule makes it much harder for them to get involved in that. Same thing with the infrastructure bill. Trump has floated an infrastructure with concepts that would essentially move infrastructure money through Wall Street intermediaries to allow Wall Street to manage the building of public assets. Guess what? Blackstone has recently said it wants to expand into investing in infrastructure. Same thing with drilling. Blackstone has been investing in offshore drilling, distressed offshore drilling companies as a private equity firm at the very same time that Trump is moving forward with rules and legislative proposals to expand offshore drilling. So essentially what you have, I mean, this is a really naked example of this, where you have literally the person who is in Donald Trump's ear advising him on economic policy, a guy who at the White House said, cabinet secretaries are presenting their ideas to me. He just said that him and his counsel. This same person runs the biggest private equity firm in the world that is literally investing in the very same areas and businesses that Trump's new policies affect and shape.